All right, so we're going to go ahead and start chapter 12 of the Next.js app router official tutorial. And let's jump into it. So it's mutating data. Learn how to mutate data with server actions. Okay, so let's just jump into what are server actions. And let me highlight the first sentence. React server actions allow us to run asynchronous code directly to the server. In other words, to keep it simple, we can really cool thing that Next.js really popularized is the server actions. And basically we can just call a function in our components or pages that runs on the server. And basically what this does, it just makes it a more JavaScripty way to work with the backend without creating a whole API route. So under the hood, this function is just making a post request for you. That's pretty much it. And we can do that through the HTML form element using the action attribute. We could also use it without the action attribute, but that's going to require probably making a client component. But since the action attribute of a form component natively sends a request, we can just pass it here. So, right, the idea is progressive enhancement. Forms work even if JavaScript is disabled on the client. You'll see a lot of tutorials use the term progressive enhancement. Basically, small things we can do to put more of our app onto the server. Less load for the user to have to pull on their client. So server actions are also deeply integrated with caching. So when a form is submitted through a server action, not only can you use the action to mutate data, but you can also revalidate the associated cache using APIs like revalidate path and revalidate tag. So more on that later. Benefit of server actions, progressive enhancement. Okay, so now we've been querying a lot of data. Let's go ahead and figure out how to add data. For example, how to create an invoice. So I'm going to pull up onto our dashboard again real quick. Here's our dashboard. And so we have to do the following. Create a new route and form. So inside our app folder, inside our dashboard, inside our invoices, we will create a new folder called create. And because we are using Next.js app directory, this is basically a new endpoint. /dashboard /invoices /create. And inside here, we will put a page.tsx file. Okay. And now let's just copy this component. And then let's do a quick glance. So we just have a main component. Inside we have a breadcrumbs component, which would just nicely show like what part of the app we're on. And then a form, which is a custom component, capital F, which will take in customers from await fetch customers. And again, await fetch customers just gives us the ID and name of all the customers. Okay, let's save this. Let's go to that page. So back here, so /invoices, and that should link to this create invoice button. Create, and here's the form. So up here, this is the breadcrumbs. Okay, these are clickable links, and this is the form. We can look at the form in a second. So again, each customer has a name and ID. We'll go here, and we just have a form component, which has the name, and then a select input for the name, and we can choose any of the names that we get. So here, all the names are mapped over as options of a select element. And same thing, and the amount is just the input field. We can choose whatever we want to put in here. And then we have a field set, which is acting as a wrapper for radio buttons. 2 radio inputs for paid or pending. Paid or pending. And right now this form should have, right, it has no on submit, no action, so this form's not gonna do anything right now. We can test that out. Type in Amy, $100, pending, create, submit. Just gonna refresh the page. Default form action. Okay, I went ahead and explained what the components are. We'll see the following UI. Let's create a server action. So they want us to go make it in a separate file. So in lib, we will create a new file called actions.ts, and we will stick a use server directive at the top. And in short, this marks the entire folder to allow server actions. So anything running here will be ran in the server. And by declaring at the top, that means everything in the file will be a server action, and we don't have to say use server for each function separately. So export async function create invoice. This takes in form data, which is a form data object. Okay, and now we can go back to our form, and let's just import that function. Import create invoice. Yeah. And then we'll pass it as an action here. Create invoice. Cool. So as long as each input has a name property or select, as long as they have a name property, we will pass the value of each of these form inputs to this form data object automatically. Okay, now let's go to here. Behind the scenes, server actions create a post API endpoint. This is why you don't need to create API endpoints manually when using server actions. Okay, now we will extract the data from the form data, which is what I just said. So const raw form data is equal to customer ID form data.get customer ID. Amount is form data.get amount. And let me just copy this down. This will be status. And let's go ahead and just log what's going on here. Raw form data. Okay, let's try it out. If I select Evil Rabbit at $120 and he's pending, we'll create invoice. Go back here and we will see that we are logging the data. And remember, it's on the server, so it's not going to be in the client. If we go to our console in our browser, we see nothing. And it's logging here because I have my Console Ninja extension, but if you go to your actual terminal, you'll see that it's being logged right here. Okay, and it gives you some tips. If you have a lot of fields, you can use the object.fromEntries method. We only have 3 fields here, so we just did it one by one. Okay, so now let's validate our data. Let's see here. Type validation and coercion. Right, so it's saying that by default, anything we get from a form data is a string, but ideally we would want the amount to be a number. So we are going to use a library called Zod to validate and also coerce our values to fit how we want them before we insert them into our database. So we're going to import Z from Zod, and we will create a form schema. We will call Z.object, basically means it's an object, and then we will just define our schema. Customer ID should be Z.string. And Zod is an awesome library. I recommend checking it out in more detail. Z.coerce.number. Status Z.enum. pending paid date is z.string. I spelled schema wrong. And let's see here. And then we want to take this base schema and make a create invoice schema, which is going to be form schema dot omit ID true, date true. And we are going to omit these fields because these will be automatically created when we insert a new entry into our database. So now we can take our raw form data and we can pass it into create invoice dot parse. And this will validate our schema and will allow us to get our data the way we want it. If our data is not good, this will throw an error. So we will not get these data. It will just throw an error. That's what parse does. It parses based on this schema. Okay. So we want to store the value in cents. Okay, that's fine. So next line we'll say const amount in cents is equal to amount.100. I think it's always better to store in cents because it just makes money easier to work with in general. And then convert it to how you say any format you want later. So we're also gonna create the date ourselves, looks like, instead of letting the database auto-generate it for us. To iso string dot split on the t and 0. So we're just formatting this date because we don't want the entire thing. We just want split on the t and get the first part. Okay, so now it's time to insert. We can import SQL from Vercel SQL, and we can do await. I love a raw query. Insert into invoices, customer ID, amount, status, date, values. I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this line. And I might be missing something. No, that's good. Okay, so now right now it says we're not handling any errors, so we'll get to that later. Next chapter. So revalidate and redirect. So we're gonna import revalidate path, and we're gonna put it after a SQL statement. Again, we're not handling errors right now. They said we'll take care of it next chapter. So revalidate path is basically if we have data on a path. So let's go to invoices for a second. This is the data on our invoices path. And right now, if it's cached, it's never going to update even if we create a new invoice. So revalidate path will manually let us pass in a path. And once we call this function, it'll revalidate the data. So if there's new data, it'll show up. And of course we want this to happen after we insert a new one. And we're also going to import redirect from next navigation. And basically once we create our invoice, let's just go back to the dashboard invoices. Dash. Congrats, you've been implemented for server action. Okay, let's try it out. So it looks like we are ordered by the newest date. So we create a new invoice. Let's do it for Lee Robinson at $200 pending. Create invoice. There you go. Brand new server action. Look how quick that was. Now we're going to do updating an invoice, which is going to be very similar. We are going to utilize dynamic endpoints with the app directory. So we will go to our invoices folder again. We will create a new file, new folder called ID. Because now it's in brackets because it's dynamic, right? Which invoice are we associating to? We can't just say invoices /1, invoices /2. So ID will will cover everything. And we don't have to call it ID, we can call it whatever we want. For example, post or slug. And inside the ID, we will have a folder called edit. And inside edit, then we'll have our page.tsx. So basically, this using the apparator, we are on /dashboard /invoices /ID/edit. And ID will be an ID of an invoice. So like 1 or 2 or 3. Okay, let's go ahead and copy this component for this page. Or are we missing something? I will leave this page blank for now. Let's go to app UI invoices table.tsx. App UI invoices table.tsx. And then we want to see that we have let's minimize this. And let me make this a little bigger. Yeah, we have an update invoice button, which is this pencil. And we want to change the href. So let's go inside update invoice. And here's the href. We don't want this. We want to make it dynamic. So it'll be invoice/ID/edit using string template literals. Save. So now if we go back here, if we look at the bottom left where the address will show up, we'll see here. This is invoices /that UUID, then this UUID/edit, this UUID/edit. Okay, and now we can go to our page.tsx. Close this, close this. We'll copy this. Again, we have breadcrumbs, and then we have a form. But right now we don't have ID, invoice, and customers. So let's get that. We are going to use, like earlier we used search params, but now we're going to use params. So params, quick difference here is that /dashboard /invoices/ID/edit. These are params right here. Whereas query params, search params or query params is going to be something like this. Query is equal to hello. These are search params and these are params. Here we want the params. It'll always have a param because we are on /ID/edit. So params is going to be TypeScript ID string. And then, sorry, I typed that wrong. It should be params like this. Okay, and then we can go ahead and distract that. Const ID is equal to params.id. Okay, that takes care of the ID. And we want to now fetch some functions. So import fetch invoices by ID. Fetch invoices by ID and fetch customers. Okay, and then we can do const invoices customers. We can use promise.all to do both queries at the same time. Fetch invoice by ID, comma, fetch customers. Customers. Invoice. Let's do these functions real quick. This will take an ID, and we will just find the ID based on the ID. And we return it. We're going to change the amount from cents to dollars, and we will return the single ID. Fetch customers, we saw that already, just returns all the customers. Okay, so now we can, it says we should have a TypeScript error, but I don't see it here, so let's ignore that. And now let's go to here. So if we click an edit button on any of these, it should properly give us the right thing. So let's look at Michael. I can't say it, so I'm gonna go. Let's go Stephen Tay. He's at $448 paid. So let's press edit. Go Stephen Tay, $448 paid. Right. So it will. Let's go to our form, and it's a different form, edit invoice form, and we have default values for our based on our invoicing customers. Where's another default value? Default value. Here, default value is here. And default value is invoice.amount. So we have our form pre-filled because we're editing now. We're not creating. Okay, so quick point about why UUIDs versus auto incrementing. Saying, hey, UUIDs make the URL longer. However, UUIDs eliminate the risk of ID collision. They're more unique, and they reduce the risk of enumeration attacks, which are more ideal for large databases. However, if you prefer cleaner URLs, you might prefer using the auto increment keys. Pass the ID to a server action. Do we already have a server action, or we have to create one? We have to create one. Okay, so first things first is that we cannot do this. Update invoice ID. Well, first of all, we don't even have this function. Let me create a skeleton for that. Export async function update invoice. Okay. And let's import that. Okay. So we can't do this. It doesn't say why, but we can't do this because let's see here. It doesn't explain why. It doesn't say why we can't do this. So I'll let that be exercised to the viewer. But instead, they want us to create a new action based on this one called update invoice with ID. And basically, we're just binding. We're taking the original update invoice and we're going to bind the ID to it. And then we will pass this function to our action. And I spelled invoice wrong here. Invoice. Okay. There's a TypeScript error here because we did not type this out yet. And then if we go to our actual function, we can use the create a schema for it. Again, where you omit the ID and date. We are going to, now that we binded it, we can get the ID from it first, and then we will get the form data. And that'll fix the TypeScript error here. And now let's just do the same thing here. Validate the data. Get the amount in cents. Here's an SQL query that will update invoices. Set customer ID to the new one. Set the amount to the new one. Set the status to the new one. Where the ID is equal to the ID. We validate path and take us back to the invoices page. Save. Okay, let's test it out real quick. We're still on Stephen Tay. 448. Let's make it 450. Edit invoice. There we go. Stephen Tay, 450. Delete invoice. So usually deleting is the most easiest of the CRUDs because we just need the ID most of the time. So we are going to go to our UI invoices buttons. Then we'll go to our delete invoice. Do you want to go here? Here we go. Delete invoice. It's just a button. And we are going to, instead of a React fragment, we will make this a form. We'll make an action with delete invoice with ID, which will be similar to our update. We're going to bind the delete invoice function dot bind null ID. Okay, but this does not exist. So let's go ahead and make that real quick. To our actions, export async function delete invoice ID string. Okay, save. All we need is the ID. We don't need the form data. And our action is very simple. And because we are not going to a separate page, we don't have to do redirect because we're already on the invoice dashboard/invoices page. SQL is delete from invoices where ID is ID. Cool. And that's it with server actions. Let's just see it in action. So remember this Lee Robinson one we made in the beginning, $200. Let's go ahead and delete it. There you go, it's gone. We got full CRUD functionality now. We get invoices, we can create invoices, we can edit invoices, and we can delete invoices. And we didn't have to make any API endpoints. So you see how much more like streamlined this is to use server actions. And again, you can still use API endpoints, which we are not doing in this tutorial, I believe. But you have the flexibility to choose, and options are always nice. So we're done with chapter 12. Sorry, chapter 12.